In September 1994, Jeff Bezos bought the URL relentless.com, but friends told him the name sounded a little creepy. So Bezos changed his name to Amazon.com in 1995. Bezos selected the name Amazon by looking at the dictionary. He chose the name Amazon because the Amazon was an exotic and different place as he planned his store. The Amazon River was the largest river in the world, and he planned to make his store the largest in the world. Since June 19, 2010, Amazon's logo has featured a curved smile-shaped arrow leading from A to Z, representing that the company owns all products from A to Z. Amazon's initial business plan was unusual. It did not expect to turn a 4 to 5 year profit. This slow growth led shareholders to complain that the company would not reach profitability fast enough to justify the investment or even survive in the long run. When the dot-com bubble burst at the beginning of the 21st century, destroying many electronics companies in the process, Amazon survived and grew in the bubble to become a huge player in online sales. It finally made its first profit in the fourth quarter of 2001, $5 million. This profit margin, while extremely modest, proved to skeptics that Bezos' unconventional business model could succeed. 2 decades later, in 2022, Amazon is the 5th most valuable company in the world by market capitalization. So it's hard to imagine that a company like Amazon could ever cease to exist. However, Jeff Bezos, founder of the company and one of the richest men in the world, sees the disappearance of his company as a more or less close possibility. Jeff Bezos has mentioned the issue on several occasions. In meetings and interviews, he has said that companies have a short life and Amazon's will be disrupted someday. And when asked one day if this worried him, he replied, "I'm not worried because I know it's inevitable. Companies come and go, and the brightest and most important of each era are gone. If you look at the big companies, their lifespan is usually over 30 years, not over 100. He also said his job was to delay Amazon's demise date as long as possible. Amazon turned 28 recently, so it is approaching that 30-year benchmark. So how true could Jeff Bezos' vision of his company's demise be? Well, this vision is not so far from reality. Despite more than 20 years of experience and steadily increasing revenues, Amazon failed in China. Amazon entered the Chinese market in 2004 by acquiring Joyo.com, a popular online bookseller, for $75 million. Years later, in 2001, it became Amazon China. However, 15 years later, Amazon announced its exit from the Chinese market and closed all its operations, keeping only Amazon Web Services, Kindle eBooks, and some import operations. But how did the world's most valuable brand fail to succeed in the world's most populous country? Despite its early entry into the market, Amazon found it increasingly difficult to compete with China's e-commerce giants. Rivals such as JD.com and Alibaba launched aggressive price wars and created shopping festivals such as the successful Singles' Day, which is sort of like a Chinese Black Friday. Another difficulty Amazon had was that its general managers were not always Chinese and had never lived in China, which put Amazon at a disadvantage compared to its rivals who did understand consumer behavior extensively. This lack of knowledge of Chinese customers can be seen, for example, in Amazon's website because it wanted to keep its image with a simple and minimalist design, while Alibaba's and Jade.com's websites are very colorful and with many ads, that is, more aimed at the Chinese consumer. It also had a wider range and variety of products and faster delivery than Amazon China. The Chinese consumer was already used to same-day delivery, while Amazon was losing ground with 2-day delivery. A decade ago, Amazon had a 15% market share. It had a reputation in China as a website that offered original products and therefore enjoyed the trust of Chinese consumers. However, as competitors were able to eliminate much of the problem of counterfeit goods, Amazon's initial advantage disappeared. In 2018, a year before it closed operations in China, Amazon had a market share of just 0.6%, while Alibaba had 61% and JD.com had 24%. On the other hand, in India, Amazon is having difficulties, not to say that it could have the same experience as in China. Despite a $6.5 billion investment in just over 7 years of operations in India, Amazon has a complicated outlook in this Asian country. India was closed to multinationals and foreign investment from its independence in 1947 until 1991, and despite the liberalization of its economy, there is still a tendency to regulate foreign investment. In 2020, India started applying a 2% tax on all foreign billings for digital services provided in the country. Another drawback is that Amazon Prime is in criminal proceedings because political leaders considered a miniseries called Tandav offensive to India. Another miniseries called Mirzapur also triggered another complaint against the company for hurting religious sentiments and defaming Hindus. These regulations and growing opposition to the brand have hampered Amazon's operations in India. But an even bigger problem is that e-commerce in this country is still very small. It accounts for only 4% of total retail sales in the country. It is estimated that 90% of retail sales in India are made in small local family-run stores called Kirana, which have millions of loyal customers. Here they can buy everything from rice and lentils to brooms and shaving cream. It should be noted that despite its investments and 7 years of operations, Amazon has yet to make a profit in India. So if it wants to try to change this situation, local stores can be very valuable in this goal. One thing that Kirana stores have, that multinationals like Amazon do not, is that they have a wide distribution network throughout the country, so they can serve as distribution centers or as Amazon's wholesale customers. Although this is not an easy path because of the rejection of the multinationals by local businesses and the consequent tendency of the government to protect them from foreign investment. So Amazon's experience in China and India validates Jeff Bezos' vision of the end of the company, and that despite its abundant resources, it does not always obtain the desired results, either due to its own mistakes, local regulations, better performance of rivals, or lack of knowledge of the local market. The principle that a company is too big to fail, which seems to protect large companies because if it is allowed to fail, it represents a serious danger to the economy, does not translate into absolute protection. However, the large size of a company could be a disadvantage because it reaches a point of such complexity that it becomes more vulnerable, as it needs more and more energy simply to keep running and ends up spending more time managing itself than focusing on customers. As companies age, they accumulate rules and systems that can make them less agile, and a change in their processes can become more costly. For example, Amazon in China spent billions of dollars to open 15 distribution centers, controlling much of its inventory and building its own infrastructure to maintain most of its processes, after all this idea had been successful in other countries. But while it was applying in China this system, rules and processes that had been successful in other countries, Alibaba, its biggest competitor, was gaining more market share by making alliances with small local sellers to offer lower prices. The point is that their bigness and rules did not do much good in China. On the other hand, the China and India market together account for 35% of the global total, and considering that Amazon no longer operates in China and in India, it has not made a profit. It means it is losing access to practically 2.7 billion people, which translates into a much smaller market and smaller potential revenue streams. So not only Amazon but any tech giant's future is not assured. There will always be the risk of being overshadowed by a young company, by a change in regulation in some country, by a new technology, or by a change in consumer behavior. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.